Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone. This is the Centrifuge Governance Call. This is a recorded call, and let's get going. This is the 18th edition of the Governance Call, and today I'm filling in for our regular facilitator, Orhan, who is with us in the audience. Feel free to be a full participant for once, Orhan. We've got some really interesting items on our agenda today that are really relevant to the direction of the protocol. If you've been here before, you'll know that we really appreciate it when people jump in and have their say. Always be mindful to check that others don't want to speak also. And you can always use the little hand tool if there's a bit of a fight going for the mic. Also use the chat to your heart's content, ask questions, make comments, drop links. So to start off with today, just a couple of quick updates. Stellaswap will be ready to list CFG in the next couple of days. In 8 hours, the asset will be registered on Moonbeam after a bit of testing. There's one live on-chain proposal currently, which is the on-chain vote to list CFG in the Hyrda Omnipool and seed the initial liquidity. This is forecast to probably pass in about 16 hours, and that would be live in the Hydra account in the next soon, basically. The other open RFC is the linked Pools RFC. Cassidy or Frederick, can you speak to that for a couple of minutes?
I can start. Maybe Frederick, you can also jump in. So Frederick's the one who's made this RFC, which you can see linked on the forum. I can also drop a link in the chat in a sec. And just wanted to highlight, that it's there and would love to see any participation. Thanks, Ivan, for the link. And also to highlight that Frederick will be making an update to that RFC to add a little bit more clarity on how some of the mechanisms will be working. So just keep your eyes open for that. And yeah, get in there and participate in the discussion. I think this is a really cool proposal to just see a little bit more flexibility in how the centrifuge pools are used. And I think it opens up new possibilities for how we can actually see pools used in the future, which I think will be pretty exciting for different sorts of integrations of centrifuge with other DeFi projects. Yeah, so would love to see any participation if you're interested in that conversation. And then Frederick, feel free to add anything that I missed.
No, that was just right. I was rather here if there are any questions on how this works rather technically, because it's a rather technical RFC proposal. We intentionally kept it like that, and this is also why we need to adapt it also a little bit to actually don't create any confusion around what is happening. So I already adapted it once, and there are some edit notes. We will adapt it slightly more a little bit, and yeah, if there are any questions on how this will work, or yeah, well, then just feel free to hit me now, or yeah, just drop a question in the governance website. I wanted to go website. I'm not sure. Forum.
The forum.
The forum.
The discourse forum. Any questions now for Frederick? Oh, it's super clear. Well done, Frederick and Cassidy. Everyone gets it. And we're looking forward to seeing it move through governance. Okay. Next up, we want to discuss with you all the subject of rewards on Centrifuge Chain. As you may have heard, the first pool will be ready to launch soon. And as there are CFG rewards for Tinlake pools, in theory, Centrifuge Chain can also support rewards for pools. And so this is the governance that needs to be done. What do we split rewards across? What is the balance? What is the percentage? Ivan has started some work and some initial thinking on this, so he's going to present that. And I think there are a few people who also have some good thoughts about rewards. I don't know if Kirill, oh yeah, you're here on the call, and maybe Kevin also have thoughts on this, but the intention here is really to get this conversation going so that we can design like the best possible solution for the DAO, and that kind of serves our shared mission. So Ivan, take it away.
Thank you, Kate. Can I share my screen?
Yes.
Okay, and this is the overview of Tinlake and Centrifuge Chain rewards. We start from the beginning. So exactly 1 year ago, the TVL on Tinlake was 86 million. And during this year, it's grown up for 145%. So this exponential growing brings to continuous adjusting of rewards in order to not dilute our total supply too much. This is the reward rate history change. So we started from 42 CFG for drop rewards for 10K and 17 CFG for tin rewards at the beginning 2 years ago, and now drop and tin investor on 3 CFG from 10K and 2.25 CFG. So here we can exactly see how the rewards have been adjusted during these 2 years. This is the actual tranche value that accruing rewards on Tinlake, drop and tin. In comparison of 3 months ago, we can see the drop rate increased from 28% up to 45, 44, and tin rewards dropped down a little bit. And now we have only around 300K CFG that with actual reward rate will be drained in around 2 weeks. So it's time to decide what to do with these rewards. Before that, we will discuss this. I will just explain how Tinlake rewards distribution works. So we have drop and tin amount. We stake it on Tinlake that generate the daily rewards. Actually, we have 22,900 CFG that is distributed among all investor daily. This reward distribution has pros and cons. Pros, clear and fixed appear for investor. Cons that we should constantly adjust and monitoring rewards each 3-4 months. And with high increasing of TVL, the rewards will significantly increase. On Centrifuge Chain, the reward distribution is quite different. We have the fixed amount set via governance that after is split between the pools. This is an example of how reward distribution works. And pros and cons of this system distribution that we have the fixed inflation, and we can easily monitor and control the inflation, but cons that with high TVL, the reward will be quite low. Since the last proposal that has passed, we minted 1,900,000 CFG. So we should decide what to do next. This is an open question. What is the ideal trade-off between the inflation and incentivized rewards? Should all invested or CFG rewards? The rewards should be minted on top or should be part of Centrifuge Treasury because the block rewards will be deployed soon. So if anyone have any idea, feel free to join.
First of all, are there any questions about the rewards and anything that Ivan presented?
So technically in 2 weeks, the rewards will be drained and we will not be longer available to distribute any rewards on Tinlake. So this is exactly the time to decide what to do next.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's other people raising their hands, but I do have a lot of questions here. This seems to be a pretty contentious topic in the community for obvious reasons, and obviously certain stakeholders have different incentives here. But to me, like, because it's still pretty early for Centrifuge from an investor perspective, and we're kind of in a winter, like the investors that I talk to, potential investors that I talk to, are like a little bit worried about a few things about Centrifuge. They're worried that like it's on this parachain that people don't really understand, and I'm trying to understand personally. They would prefer if it was like the new ones, rather, it would be on like if it was on Ethereum. And so then they're also kind of worried about the complexity of the system. I think it's a great system, but it takes a lot of persuading people that like this is a better system than TradFi, like TradFi funds. And then the last piece is like it's kind of just like new in general, this whole concept of on-chain credit. So I think you probably need to continue to incentivize. I think that the idea that you can get a little bit of extra juice in Centrifuge token excites most people who are considering buying into a traditional fund or Centrifuge. From an investor perspective, obviously you have a problem of inflation and that should be modeled out. I'm not an expert in that, so I'd love to hear opinions on the inflation side as a holder. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of like what I think. I think that we should continue to incentivize, and I think it's important to figure out how we're going to incentivize on a new platform on the parachain, on Centrifuge Chain.
Yeah, nice one. Thank you, Chris. Ivan, do you want to stop sharing and just put those open questions into the chat? Because then we can more easily keep the conversation going. Any responses to Chris?
Not so much a response, but just like, obviously, if we don't actually do anything, then people will be disincentivized to invest in new pools and incentivized to put capital into Tinlake if we continue with the rewards the way we have. So, and I think that's the opposite of what we want, right? So looking at that, I do think we will have to figure out a way to start issuing rewards on Centrifuge. I also agree with Chris that like completely stopping with rewards won't help.
Okay. Kirill?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, just kind of, wanted to point out a couple of things, just going back to the beginning, as we were the first pool on Tinlake. I do recall, obviously it was a different situation, but certainly rewards at that time were extremely helpful in getting everything off the ground. That was, again, different time, but I do believe they were very helpful. I think they would be very helpful on Centrifuge, the new app, as well. And speaking with investors, kind of along the lines of what Chris said, even if it's 1 or 2 points in difference that rewards make is a huge difference, because everybody, all of the pools, everybody's competing against TradFi and the high yields that people are getting there. And so I think even adding this 1, 2, 3%, whatever it may be, is very, very helpful. It makes a huge difference. And then I think the last point is on the inflation. We haven't seen sort of like decreasing inflation having direct correlation to price. So I'm still not convinced. I think it's more of a market momentum that drives price. I don't know if folks are worried about like releasing too much supply and driving down price. It probably has some factor there. Like I didn't study it as in depth as maybe some others have, but I have, like, at a high level, I haven't seen that personally. Thank you.
Assad, and then we'll pass to you, Ryan, and yeah, go from there.
Yeah, the only just like a quick comment for me is that I actually think Carol's right. It's not really price that should motivate us. I almost think about it more from like opportunity cost. Where could we use those tokens elsewhere? And so far, we haven't really seen other proposals. So like in that type of state, rewards makes the best sense, right? But I think there are opportunities to use those tokens elsewhere. And if we think that there's better usage for them, then we like that's maybe should be a motivating factor. But to me, I mean, I would agree with most people here that I think rewards also are like rewards for investors, like especially like as Carol mentioned, that extra juice really does make a big difference and helps. And even what Chris said earlier, I think it's useful for we're still in the early adoption phase of the protocol.
Ryan?
Yeah, and I'll largely agree with everybody else. I was going to say, it seems as, with the Tinlake being sort of the primary product for RWA, I mean, you'd almost have to continue to draw in capital and new investment in the protocol. So to me, it seems like a foregone conclusion that they should continue. But what I'm curious about is and maybe I apologize for not knowing this in advance, but like, what is the current inflation rate? How much is it going to be impacted if we start giving rewards to people who are staking, for instance, on the chain itself? It's clear too, and this is coming from one of the infrastructure providers, that there currently are no rewards, right? Like you can't stake on Altair or Centrifuge. And I mean, has this been a common complaint among people like that are more, for lack of a better word, normies in the community like me? I mean, I'll be honest, I got CFG tokens just so I could vote, but I mean, not everybody's a governance nerd the way that Limo and me are. So I just don't know if there's a delicate balance to be struck with regard to like what the current inflation rate is versus how much would have to be peeled off to give to people as part of block rewards, just so that they feel like they're earning something on their income. I think too, just the comment that Assad made about, just price and everything else, like we shouldn't let these dictate the decision, because I mean, we're at a particular low in the market and everything else. I feel, if I'm being honest, not financial advice and all, but it seems like Centrifuge as a chain is fundamentally undervalued for what Tinlake brings to the table. So I feel like there's plenty of momentum for the token itself over the long term that it'll appreciate, to where, maybe the inflation shouldn't be that much of an issue, or maybe it's not even needed at all, but depending on what the current metric is.
Thanks for that, Ryan. You raised some quite interesting points there. Does anyone want to respond to any of those?
I guess for me, the main question will be whether changing the reward rate here will impact users coming to Centrifuge and actually providing liquidity to these pools. And I think, yeah, given the market conditions, I don't think we've seen actually a big impact so far. And I think for me, it doesn't make sense maybe to overhaul and like drastically change these rewards as we move over from Tinlake to Centrifuge pools. But I think it's a really good opportunity to, have this reflection here and have this presentation from Ivan and really just start digging into it and thinking about it. I'm not super opinionated on moving them one direction or another, but it's really nice to hear some of your questions. I think maybe to answer a couple of them. So Ivan dropped the current issuance rate for these rewards in the chat, and that's 1.73% of the current supply. And in addition to that, we also will see block rewards start to fill the treasury, the on-chain treasury, and that's actually the next topic that I wanted to talk about, which is a good segue into that one. But that will be 3% of the total issuance minted yearly. And so we'll see basically, an increase in the CFG supply from both of those different places. And I think to Assad's point, the main thing that we should be thinking about is one, how to best use that CFG to really support the protocol. And two, like, will giving that as rewards, will we really see a difference in the amount of, in the, size of TVL on Centrifuge because of it? And I think maybe just to add one other comment here, there's ways that we could implement this without having the issuance be sort of automatic on chain. We could potentially, as a DAO, decide we want to focus on much larger users to the protocol, and having maybe another project or another fund, for example, propose directly to the DAO and look for CFG rewards that way. And instead of, rewarding every single user at a large amount that comes in directly to the protocol. So that's, I don't know if that sort of made sense there, but we just wanted to highlight that. I don't know if anyone else would want to add to that point.
Yeah, I definitely want to echo pretty much everything you just said, Cassidy. I think that's the right way to think about it. The only thing I can add to the thought process and the conversation about this is like the way to think about the inflation rate specifically is really that like inflation should never exceed growth. Now, I think that we do have like a pretty decent growth if you use TVL as kind of a proxy for that. So that gives us room to work with on the inflation side. It doesn't make it necessarily something we have to entirely avoid. But when we think about inflation, I mean, I think we really have to think about specifically how that inflation is going to drive growth. If it's just to sustain our current status, it's probably not being well used, right? That's a synthetic incentive. Like if people are only in here because they are getting incentives, that's not necessarily like a sustainable business model. What would be a more sustainable business model is, hey, if we can give them incentives to get them over the hurdle to get them here, and then once they get here, the product market fit does the work for itself, right? Like they're here for a reason, and they stay here regardless of the incentives. If they're only here because of the incentives, then we're in a position where like Centrifuge is vulnerable to Goldfinch or competitors or whatnot, because that's mercenary capital. So that's at least how I think about it.
Nice one. Thanks, Jake. We have room for one last comment on this. Ivan, we haven't answered your questions, but I think this is just the beginning of this. But if anyone does have thoughts on those 3 questions that Ivan is trying to collect information on, what is the ideal trade-off between inflation and incentivized rewards? We've talked a bit about that. Should all investments earn CFG? Touched on that a little bit. The rewards, one that we haven't really touched on, which can flow into the next segment, which is about the treasury, is should the rewards be minted on top of or be part of the Centrifuge Treasury? Any thoughts on any of those questions before we move on to actually talking about the treasury? Otherwise, Ivan, what are the next steps for this?
I was going to ask for some next steps. I think it would be good to get to start. I mean, given what you said, right, that we have 2 weeks of rewards left on Tinlake, I think as the first pool launches, we should definitely start thinking of allocating some of it there. And ultimately, those 2 decisions have to be made together, in my opinion. Like, we can't decide about the Tinlake rewards without also thinking about what Centrifuge Chain rewards will look like. So, given that, I was going to propose that a way to get community sentiment would be with a few polls on OpenSquare and defining a few parameters to get first feedback to come to a proposal that does make sense. That's I guess how I would try to get an idea somewhere, giving a few options of what was discussed today.
Okay. Ivan, any last concluding statements before we move on?
I think the governance and coordination group can start the discussion on forum, and we can bring the feedback from issuer and investor and token holders, and as Lucas said, decide what should be the rate and vote for it in order to be sure that this is the choice of the DAO.
Sounds good. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for continuing to work on Tinlake rewards and also for addressing this new rewards opportunity. Now we're going to talk about the Centrifuge Treasury because minting CFG is just around the corner, and we'll start to see an accumulation in the on-chain treasury. And of course, technically anyone can make a proposal to ask for some of these funds. In my experience, this is one of the two top biggest challenges that DAOs face. How do we spend these funds wisely? How do we ensure proposals asking for funds are the best possible use of these funds, that they take us further in achieving the mission, that the group or person applying actually has the requisite experience? How do we ensure that they deliver and execute? And what we want to talk a bit about now is how do we not just spend funds because they're there, when perhaps at the moment, this particular moment, we're not in a kind of spending type of time, I would say. How do we wisely caretake the funds that accumulate and remain, and all of these questions? So Cassidy, I'll pass over to you to talk about the RFC that you're working on.
Sure. Yeah, so I think because this is, I think, such an important question for DAOs, I'll be putting an RFC live, hopefully in the next day or so. Basically just opening this discussion and hopefully with the result of coming to some sort of an agreement as a DAO on how we would like to see, generally how we would like to see Treasury funding proposals come in, and what sort of things proposers as well as CFG voters should be considering. And primarily that as a DAO with no funds in the on-chain treasury, that for the moment, at least, given the current context, we should really be thinking about saving these funds as much as possible to give the DAO treasury as much strength as it can to really be successful in its objectives. So I'll be putting that live soon and would love to have your comments on that forum post once it does go live. But also just opening the discussion here, I think it really ties into this previous conversation we've been having around what is the best use of CFG funds. And I think, yeah, I think important in that is, you know, also how we don't use them, and that as a DAO, we want to be able to grow the on-chain treasury and be able to have real power there to be able to make things happen. And I think historically with a lot of DAOs, we've seen a lot of mismanagement in treasury spending. And one thing that I'd like to just put out as an ask to the people here, and generally speaking, is, you know, if you did know someone who has experience working with these DAO treasuries that you think could give a lot of good insight to the Centrifuge DAO, would love to speak with them, have an introduction, either point them to our forum or to one of us here in the call. I think it could be really helpful to get more experienced people who've worked with DAO treasuries and maybe seen a lot of the mismanagement, maybe start to get involved in Centrifuge. I think that would be really great. But yeah, maybe I would just open that up then to any thoughts there. Otherwise, if there's not a ton of questions, I realize I don't have the post live yet, so it might make that hard to interact with, but that'll go live soon. I'm happy to have you a conversation on the forum too.
Hey, so I'm Chris. I'm Vice President of Engineering at Tally XYZ. We have 10 billion in DAO treasury on our platform, about 4,000 DAOs total. So happy to chat with anyone about DAOs, happy to connect. We talk to Arbitrum all the time, biggest DAO probably of all time. So happy to share our experiences and what we've learned about DAOs over the last 3 years with the community. See how we can jam on that.
Nice, thanks, Chris. Maybe we could reach out to you and have a little, a more focused conversation just on your experience there. Maybe do a download from some of what you've seen. I think Arbitrum in particular had a really interesting, dramatic event with their treasury spending. So those
But
are
I
the
think everything's going well right now. They've got 3 proposals live. They almost knocked down Tally like a few times. So probably definitely our biggest DAO ever, and we're very thankful for all the traffic that we're getting, but it's keeping me very busy.
very cool.
Yeah, that sounds, it would be great to get more thoughts from you, Chris. Perhaps a little working group can form around this. Any, like off the top of your head, like what's the one thing that you think we should be thinking about right now?
I honestly like still wrapping my arms around your the community and your governance and like what kind of things you guys vote on. But I think you guys are doing great. I mean, I think the few top things top of mind for many DAOs is like, well, how do you get as many people involved as possible? What, like, you guys are already past the airdrop, so you can't like think about like fair token distribution or anything like that. But you can think about like, well, what's the right way to like get people engaged and like identify delegates. One thing that we find interesting is some DAOs pay their delegates a salary. So you find people who like have like a lot of clout in the community, and they literally, their only job is to be delegates. They're essentially politicians for the DAO, and they get paid like some salary. At MakerDAO, for example, that's up to $400,000 a year base salary plus bonus. So maybe that's not something that this DAO can afford, but depends like what the resources are of the community. Yeah, I mean, I think delegation and engagement is probably top, like most important. After that, it's like, well, what's the point of the DAO and like what should it be doing? But I feel like you guys do have like kind of mission like figured out, so it's maybe more engagement then.
We have some of those things. There's a bit of work happening on looking into delegation right now. And in this call, we're kind of pausing that until we really understand what the move to OpenGov, which Limo is here to talk to us about, which we'll move on to shortly. But thanks for that summary, Chris. Limo, did you have any thoughts that you wanted to contribute about DAO management from what you've seen in the DAOs you've been in?
I'm probably better off writing this down. Maybe if you can link me the RFC. I'm just a big fan of everything being super open. In terms of like getting paid for being a delegate, I'm not too sure that's the best idea ever. I can maybe be convinced otherwise. It'd be good for me and ChaosDAO if we got paid for doing that on Kusama and Polkadot, but I think as people who are going for delegated votes should really kind of really like the protocol, right? And it should be something they really enjoy. And it's that love of the protocol that makes them want to vote. It shouldn't be some financial gain thing, in my opinion.
Cool. Yeah, I think that we'll definitely have this in-depth discussion as we look further into how we'll do delegation or continue to do delegation. Any last thoughts on treasury management?
Yeah, maybe just one thought on this. Just sharing some experience from other DAOs that I've participated in the treasury management for. Really, it comes down to 3 prongs, and like you want to run a DAO treasury similar to how you would think about running an endowment, because you're trying to make something that is, perpetual and sustainable, rather than something that is like a hedge fund does for high, low risk aversion, high returns, right? We're doing quite the opposite there. So that breaks down to 3 things. The first thing is that you need liquidity for the token. So you need to really focus on how you can establish liquidity for the token. This is probably the hardest part of it. And whoever is, really working on the DAO treasury management should have some background in incentivization and DEXs and centralized exchanges as well. The second part here is diversification. So, folks like Era Finance, the Gauntlet people are pretty good at this. They might be worth reaching out to talk to about that. But it's important for the treasury to be diversified so that it can, it can tolerate certain market conditions. And it's very hard to diversify a treasury when you're starting from pure Gov tokens. And then the third part, and also a very important part, is the reporting and the monitoring. So typically this doesn't overlap with the people who are good with liquidity, but on the reporting and the monitoring side, proper visibility into the treasury that helps you make decisions, the right decisions, but also helps people hold you accountable. Those things are very important. So usually requires at least somebody with an accounting background and an on-chain background to collaborate on that part. So I think those are really the three things to keep in mind when working on DAO treasury management.
Great. It's good we have this recorded, so we'll go through and write all of those down, and also the reflections from you, Chris. And yeah, I think we have quite a lot of good expertise in this room to kick off this process. So thanks everyone. And Cassidy will be posting that RFC really soon. Any last words there, Cassidy, before I pass over to Limo?
No, nothing else to add.
Cool. Okay, so yeah, now we're going to talk about this possible transition to OpenGov, which is the new Polkadot Governance Framework. Thanks so much for joining us here, Limo. I think this is a really great example of DAO to DAO and ecosystem collaboration, like taking the time to share what you've learned in your kind of experiment with using OpenGov, and then sharing that in the governance call of another DAO. This is great to see, and it's really important for how we as an ecosystem kind of make it all together. So thanks for that, and over to you.
I will quickly share my screen, and thanks for inviting me to come and talk. I need to change my Zoom system preferences. One sec. Sorry. So basically, yeah, I need to quit Zoom. Okay, I will be back in 2 minutes. Okay, sorry about this.
Limo, you can also send me the slides if you want.
Sure, I will send you them. That could be easier.
You can just DM me in the Zoom chat and then make sure I have permissions.
You should be able to see that.
Yeah, I got it. So I'll do the sharing for you.
Great, thank you very much.
Starting now.
So, hello everybody. For those that don't know me, I know there's a few people in the call that I speak to on quite a regular basis. I'm Lima from NovaWallet Technologies, the company behind the amazing NovaWallet. And because this is a governance-centered call, I'm also on the Hyrda DX Ambassadors Council, and I also frequent the Attempts at Governance podcast every Monday and Thursday. And I'm also kind of spearheading the governance participation at ChaosDAO. And I'm lucky enough to be here to talk to you about Polkadot OpenGov and some of the thoughts and considerations that you guys should really think about before you kind of move to this new system. So next slide, please. So we'll first talk about some of the positives of OpenGov. I'm just assuming that a lot of you know about Gov1 in Polkadot. So the first thing that is a good positive of OpenGov compared to, and next slide, please, compared to Gov1 is it increases the decision-making throughput of the chain. So with Gov1, you can only have one referendum be voted on at a time, unless the council raises an external motion, then you can have multiple. But OpenGov allows the average participant to submit referendum to be voted on in parallel with referendum by their peers. Next slide, please. So it increases the safety of decision-making through this concept called origins. So in Gov1, everything goes through this one privilege level known as root. So it means that every single referendum you have to really heavily scrutinize in case there's something malicious in there, right? Because everything will be processed through this one ultimate power. Whereas in OpenGov, you have multiple origins. So you have root, which is the highest privilege level, and it can do things like execute runtime upgrades, changing the underlying business logic of the chain, all the way down to the small tipper track, which can maybe tip like $100 for a one-off task that somebody's done really well, right? And everything in between. And for a chain in particular, you probably have your own custom palettes, which do specific operations. You can create custom origins that are specific to those palettes and have their own parameters and stuff as well. It's really customizable. And next slide, please. And it removes the point of centralization in the council. I'm sure that most people here with the Governance Centrifuge are pretty aware of the council, this democratically elected body of people that have some power to do with like the treasury and also proposing external motions that then become referenda with a different quorum than if you were in the public proposal queue. And OpenGov removes this point of centralization, which can be a good or a bad thing depending on your particular organization. Next slide, please. But everything in OpenGov and governance in general is not all sunshine and rainbows. There's a few problems, such as this first one. Next slide, please. Which is maybe not to do with OpenGov, but in general, there's a lack of awareness about governance overall. The average token holder that has these proof of stake tokens, or maybe even just governance tokens, they're not aware that governance is a thing. It's why it's really cool. I think this is like the second or third Centrifuge governance talk I've been to. It's really cool that you guys really put governance at the center of what you do and try and encourage participation. We need more groups to be like you guys, because the average person has no idea about on-chain governance. Next slide, please. OpenGov is even more complex than Gov1 on Polkadot. There's things like support and approval curves, which nobody understands when they first get into it. There's things like different periods, decision period, confirmation period, and the relationship between the two confuses everybody at first. So it really takes a lot of research or hands-on practice to understand it, which is kind of frustrating. Next slide, please. The volume of referendums when you move to OpenGov increases dramatically. If you look at Polkadot in the past 2 years since governance has been a thing, there was only 29, I believe, public proposals, right? Now OpenGov has been live for 1 week. I think there's 25 proposals. So 29 over 2 years, 25 over 1 week. It's a big difference, right? Same on Kusama. There's been like 230 referendums in 6 months. So it can lead to a lot of voter fatigue. The average token holder really does not have time to review all these referendums, which then goes into delegation like we spoke about earlier as well. Next slide, please. I think this is the last pain point. Voter turnout. I haven't looked at the distribution of the CFG token, but if it's anything like Kusama and Polkadot, there's a few accounts that have loads of tokens and they kind of like voting with them. So what you want to do, you want to increase voter turnout, so their slice of the pie of votes becomes a lot smaller, because when the pie is bigger, they keep the same size, right? So it's super important to encourage increased voter turnout by either promoting governance or delegations, right? Next slide, please. So my good friend Funky, who's on the call, has caught me up to speed with some of the specifics of Centrifuge governance. So apologies if I get anything wrong, and please tell me at the end if I got anything wrong. So I'll go through some considerations that you guys should make before you maybe start debating whether you should move to OpenGov. And next slide, please. So the first one is, you guys seem to have this RFC process, this request for comment step in your governance. You need to think about how important that is. Is that a real cornerstone of your governance where it can't function effectively and efficiently without this RFC process? Next slide, please. How much does your community favor the status quo? OpenGov is a lot faster. It's iterative like decision making, whereas Gov1 is a lot slower. So you can kind of spend the time to discuss things, which there's a nice flow chart later on, which I'll discuss in more detail. Next slide, please. track parameters. So in OpenGov, like I said, there's these different origins, and each origin can have different parameters associated with it. So things like runtime upgrades, which is very kind of dangerous potentially, you can demand a certain amount of voter turnout, or it just won't enact, right? And things like a tipper track where you just tip something like $100 or something, you can make that really easy to pass, for example, right? It's very customizable. You don't need the approval to go towards just a simple majority. You can set it at 75%, for example, and you can demand a certain amount of voter turnout, or things just will not execute on chain. Next slide, please. So this is kind of technical, and it's a bit too technical for me, but I know it's something that I know exists as part of my involvement in Robonomics and trying to move that project to the OpenGov model. So I'm assuming Centrifuge has your own custom palettes, this kind of logic for your runtime, which can execute certain operations for the chain. I'm going to assume most of these operations require root origin access right now, because historically that's what you've needed, right? Because in Gov1 everything goes through root. When you move to OpenGov, you can have custom origins, and if you don't refactor your palettes and the origins that they require for things to execute, then everything has to go through root, and there's like no point in moving to OpenGov to have more referendum be possible. So you need to factor in the developer time that's required to make these modifications. I didn't know that was a thing until we started doing stuff with Robonomics, and it's delayed stuff massively. Next slide, please. I will go through origins after, no worries. And you don't need to open the treasury. So this is one thing that's a big concern for a lot of projects that want to move to OpenGov, because they look at Kusama and Polkadot and they see, to be frank, a lot of people grifting and putting in proposals that don't add any value to the chain, for example. But you can keep your treasury guarded by the council. They can be like the first line of defense. You don't need to open up the treasury tracks, which is something that Moonriver does right now, and I think Hydra DX is maybe going to adopt as well. Next slide, please. So this is what I think is your current governance process on the left. I might be slightly wrong. So your preferred route is your user makes an RFC to get comments and stuff from the community. Then there's some kind of off-chain signaling vote, right? Does this want to go to a vote? Then the council raises a council motion. And if that's voted aye, it then becomes an external motion in the proposal queue. And then it becomes a simple majority approved referendum, so just over 50% to pass. But in one, there's another possible route, right? There's you can just go straight to public proposal without any RFC, without any off-chain vote. But it has the caveat that it's a supermajority approved referendum, which means that due to adaptive quorum biasing in Polkadot, it means if you have, for example, 1% voter turnout, you probably need 95% aye for something to pass with this quorum, right? So it's super safe, and this is what I was talking about with the status quo earlier. Gov1 is super safe in this regard, because you can kind of incentivize people to go through the preferred route. Whereas in OpenGov, it's a bit different. So your preferred route would probably be, you have the RFC, there's the off-chain signaling vote, and then it would eventually become this simple majority approved referendum. The problem is with OpenGov, you can just go straight to the ultimate vote, right? And it's no different from the vote if you went the preferred route, unlike Gov1. The one way around this is, you can set your track parameters for everything to be, for example, requiring 1% voter turnout and 75% aye. You can have then this group called the fellowship, like there is on Polkadot and Kusama, that can approve referendums like a council motion. Basically, they can review referendums and ensure it's not going to damage the chain, and then there'll be lower support and approval criteria, for example. So this is something that you guys need to consider as well. The fact that you can just kind of jump straight to this ultimate vote, and will be the same as if somebody did it the preferred way. Next slide, please. And I see the questions. I will answer them at the end as well. No worries. So there's this nice little book that I'm reading that I've got right next to me. And it's called Reinventing Organizations by a French fellow called Frederick Laloux. And in this book, he kind of describes the changing of kind of like organizational structures and governance models, that kind of stuff. And one thing to remember is moving towards a more complex governance model doesn't make your organization any better than somebody else's or better than it was before you adopted the new model, right? Certain types of governance really are better suited to certain organizations depending on the goal of the organization. For example, the military in Lalou's book is an amber organization, which is very like he who wears the robes has the power. And compare that to a green or a teal organization, which has a lot of individuality and self-expression. That probably wouldn't work for the military. It needs to be very rank and file. So it's a clear example of certain governance models are not suited to certain types of organizations, right? Next slide, please. I think we're almost there. Okay, so agile delegations. We spoke about delegations previously. So I'll explain to you how they work in Polkadot, mainly in OpenGov, but delegations work for Gov1 as well. Next slide, please. So for example, you have Alice, right? And Alice is an active Centrifuge governance participator. So she has a bunch of people delegating to her because they're not active, too busy, but they understand that governance is important, so they're delegating their votes. Now, when Alice votes aye or nay in Gov2 in particular, everybody follows her vote, right? So they automatically vote alongside her. Everything's great. One thing that people don't know is when Alice votes abstain via the split abstain function, that type of vote, everybody does not vote abstain alongside her. And that can lead to the delegators thinking she's inactive if she always votes abstain. So it's a really niche edge case, but it's something to be aware of. And there's another edge case on the next slide as well. So same setup. Alice has a lot of delegated votes, right? But then maybe, you know, she starts being active, but understands she wants to delegate herself, right? She delegates to Bob because Bob's a popular dude, is active in governance, and Charlie and David are also delegating to him, so he's a trustworthy fellow. The problem is when Bob votes on chain, only level 1 here, so Charlie, Alice, and David vote. All the level 2 people don't vote. So it means that if you kind of want to get delegated votes, you probably should try and be active and not become inactive after like 1 month after getting delegated votes, right? This is a real niche edge case. It's just something people are not too familiar with. Next slide, please. So again, part of NovaWallet, got the t-shirt on. So I kind of need to tell you a little bit about our governance capabilities really quick. Next slide, please. So like I said, awareness is a big issue in governance in general. That's why at NovaWallet, we have governance and the vote option as being one of our 4 main screens at the bottom of our app. We have assets. Obviously, people want to see their balances, then vote, and then we have the DApp browser, and then staking. So we take it really seriously. We think people should really focus on voting, and I'm really happy that you guys at Centrifuge and the community take it as seriously as we do. It's really cool to see. And next slide, please. Complexity, like I said, especially OpenGov is quite complex with all these graphs and periods and all this kind of stuff. I know Funky knows. So we try and abstract that away and represent it in easier to understand imagery, which is, I think, much better and allows people to more easily understand everything that's going on. Next slide, please. And I think this one's delegations. Yes, it is. So overall referendum volume and voter turnout. So we kind of fix this in the same way with delegations, right? So I'm sure most people know what delegating is. You assign your voting power to somebody else. But me as part of ChaosDAO, right? I want to get more delegated votes because we have a nice governance process in our DAO and want more voting power. And it was something that was on my mind. How do people find ChaosDAO? Did they go to our Twitter and then find the address to delegate to? That's boring and terrible. So the best way is to have a nice discoverability interface like our delegate registry, where anybody can sign up, put their information. People that want to delegate can easily find them. It's something that I think is absolutely amazing, and more people should do. I think Parity is doing a similar delegation dashboard, and it'd be good to have this in Gov1 as well. But I guess one at a time. And next slide, please. So for those that don't know, we do currently support Centrifuge and Altair Gov1. You can see this is, you can see at the very top of the phone how it's kind of buggy because it's an actual screenshot of an Android phone being put on an iPhone. But you can see the listing Centrifuge on Hyrda DX Omnipool and see the initial liquidity vote. That's from my phone, so it's live. You can click on that and vote right now on NovaWallet and vote for doing that, which I think you should because I'm part of the Hyrda DX Council, but don't let me sway you. Next slide, please. We also support OpenGov. So if you do transition to OpenGov, we can support you. There might be some extra work with custom logic for different origins with your custom palettes, but we'd be happy to have a discussion with the Centrifuge community about implementing the full feature set for your OpenGov if you do swap to that as well. And next slide, please. And this is the last 4 slides. So we are truly multi-chain. We support tons of Polkadot networks and tokens. And next slide, please. So for example, when your if and when the referendum passes to list Centrifuge in the Omnipool, we can add that swap on, that transfer on Node. So you can very easily transfer CFG tokens to and from Centrifuge and Hyrda DX, which is super cool, and do it all from the palm of your hand, which is even more amazing. Next slide, please. So yeah, let's build together. I'm literally always available, as Funky will tell you. Just reach out to me if there's anything that you want to talk about. If there's anything with OpenGov that you want me to talk about, I can go into more detail in text and stuff like that as well, or we can have another call about stuff in more detail as well. And final slide is a QR code. If you want to scan that and join the Nova community to talk to me, that's great. You can submit your feature requests to Nova. If there's something that you think we should implement for the Centrifuge community, let us know, and we'll probably get ahead and do that pretty quick. And yeah, use the Nova tools for yourself, like NovaWallet, and we have like iOS and Substrate, iOS and Android SDKs for Substrate, and we have this nice new desktop app coming soon for DAOs and enterprises, which I think might be of interest to you guys as well. And that's my presentation finished. I saw there was some questions in the chat. How do you want me to answer them? I can answer them later on Discord or now, however you guys want me to do that.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. That was very informative. I'm sure there'll be a bunch of questions, and we're at the top of the hour, so we'll stay around for a couple more minutes if that's fine, and then anything that we don't answer now, we can go onto the forum and start to talk there. So Orhan, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be quick. Firstly, thanks for that awesome presentation, Limo. That was very helpful. I noticed when you mentioned about like the treasury being locked behind the council in OpenGov, I just want to understand how that would work. Does that mean we would run like Gov1 and OpenGov simultaneously, or what does that mean?
Yeah, as far as I understand it, you just don't set treasury origins in OpenGov, and then you maintain some of the governance one palettes, such as the treasury palette and the council palette, I guess, and keep everything behind that for the treasury. Yeah.
All right, great. The last one, if you can answer it quickly, if not, it's okay. And that's about you said that the OpenGov is faster than Gov1, but in my head, I see some scenarios where Gov1 is actually faster to enact proposals. For example, if you have an emergency proposal on the Gov1 now, we can create a council motion, fast track it, 3 hours enactment. If something happens in OpenGov, what is the fastest way to enact a proposal? I know you can do it in the whitelist call from the fellowship, and it can be even faster, but what time range are we talking about roughly?
So this depends on how you set your origins up. I'll give an example from Robonomics, for example. So you can have a track associated with an origin that is like 10 minutes for something to be voted on, right? And an example actually from Hyrda DX, talking with them, because I know you guys have maybe researched Hydra a bit. The current plan, I believe, is to have 2 origins for the Omnipool. One will be like adding assets to the asset registry and opening HRMP channels and things like that. But the other origin will be at the time when you want to add an asset into the Omnipool specifically, the weights and all how the algorithm works is all based on the current spot price of the token, right? So that origin will be like 2 hours long, but that origin will only be able to execute specific extrinsics for adding things to the tokens to Omnipool, right? So it's fully customizable. It just depends on how you set up origins for different types of extrinsics. You can make it as fast as you want or as slow as you want.
Cheers, mate. Thanks.
Okay. Chris will pass to you and then we'll close the call. I think you're muted.
I was just gonna say, I don't really want to take everyone's time because everyone's got to go to lunch. Or at least I do. Yeah, nice job, Lena. That was really, really awesome. I would love at some point to dive into like how the smart contracts work and like what points to what and how that works technically. It's very interesting. I love that. Like something we find really, really hard is like that workflow. So the fact that you've actually built that workflow and maybe that's like actually automated between like from like whatever happens in a Discord going to like a forum to like a signal vote to like an actual on-chain vote. It's really, really cool. The devil is definitely in the details on those things, but it's cool to see that you guys are thinking about it, doing good work there.
Cool. Thank you for that comment. And thanks so much, Limo. Any last words before we close the call? Okay, I'm going to stop recording. Thanks everyone for joining the 18th Centrifuge Governance Call. That was a really good one.